Good morning, everyone, and good day and good evening, wherever in the world you are. And I want to welcome my wonderful guest today, Gregg Braden. Hi, Greg. Yay.
Amber, it's so good to see you. And this is the first time that we have done this where we're not in the same time zone, I believe. I'm just realizing that. So, uh,
Yeah. The
yeah,
world is
so,
next door. You're in New Mexico and I'm in Arizona.
yeah, well, we're in the same geographic area, so it works okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really excited that we could get together today. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule. I know your seat is just barely touching your chair there, and you'll be off to do something else exciting and fun. And the last time I saw you was, I don't remember the month, this summer in Nanaimo in British Columbia when you were
That's
there
right.
for the Science and Spirituality Conference. So that was a beautiful gathering of people. And I know it's not happening in 2019, but in 2020, we have another one planned. So
Is that the same location? I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't know. Are we going back to the same
no,
place?
we'll be on the other side of Canada.
Well, that's what I thought, because I know in Nanaimo, it was a beautiful conference and the community wasn't quite prepared for, it was
Right.
kind of like a modern Woodstock where
Yes, it is.
we knew a certain number of people were coming, and the community was accustomed to cruise ships coming with a
Right.
few thousand people and they leave a few hours later, and we were a few thousand that stayed for a week.
They couldn't get rid of us. Yeah, it was,
Yeah, yeah.
I could hear an audible sigh of relief as the last cars drove away. But what a beautiful gathering and
Oh,
what
yeah.
beautiful teachings. It was just really, really lovely. So I wanted to ask you, where are you? I was listening to one of your recordings yesterday, and I just loved the Zen sound of how you were talking about observing how you feel and then deciding what you want to do about it. And I think that the way the world is today, and the way that we're all feeling a little, nail-bitingly tense about the things that are going on in the world. And, in our little world, our private world of Greg and Bruce and Joe and Lee and Lynn and Kryon and you and me, and we have this wonderful community, but that's not what the whole world is doing right now.
Yeah.
We're a small part and hoping to be a bigger part all the time, but there are so many things in the world right now: climate, politics, immigration, water, fire, that are, it seems like we're surrounded with this not good news that is happening. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say to people that are, living in this world, that are looking at that mess everywhere, to not lose hope and to not feel afraid?
Well, there's two very different things: not losing hope and not feeling afraid. So, I'm just listening to everything you're saying, Amber, and I can't help but think back. Do you remember back at that 2012 thing that was happening?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And it meant different things to different people, and it was certainly misinterpreted by a lot of people. And a lot of people, even in our genre, it was misinterpreted. And I remember so many people thought something was going to happen on the day of 2012, December 21st of 2012. And the next day they woke up and they said, nothing happened. Okay, let's keep on keeping on. And that's not what the Mayans were talking to us about at all. They said it marked the beginning of a cascade of change. And they said very clearly, in 10 years, you won't recognize your world. And people pretty much blew that off, and they pretty much discounted it. And even recently, I was at a conference, and one of the questions, we did the Q&A at the end of the conference, and someone came up and they said, when can we expect the changes that you talked about around the 2012 era? And I said, where have you been? What kind of change, are you waiting to see? So I think the fact that we're going through the change that we're seeing right now, to the people who have been tuned into the world, tuned into their hearts, tuned into our ancestors, that the changes are no surprise. And even, you know, in my lifetime, Amber, I've been blessed so far, and I hope that I'm blessed even much more as I continue. But I've been blessed to meet some of the most amazing. I've met a couple of presidents. I have met religious leaders, spiritual leaders, scientists, engineers, you know, architects, social architects, political leaders. And all of them, as different as they are from one, indigenous elders, as different as they are from one another, they all knew that these changes were coming. And since I have had the opportunity to speak to those people, even in the last few months, every one of them, even though they knew the changes were coming, they were all blown away by how fast this change is happening. So even those people that knew that we could expect a lot of change, they didn't expect it to happen so quickly. They thought it would be like a slow burn over a long period of time, and not like the whoosh, you know, that we're having right now. So what I say to people, number one, the change is necessary. And I think depending upon our perspective. So I want to say, when it comes to us as individuals, we can't stop the change. The world is marching forward. We're on a path, and the world is on a path, and each of us as individuals are on a path. And although we may not be able to see where that path leads specifically, and I don't think we can, because we're still choosing that path as we go. And I want to talk about that here in just a moment. So although we can't see the outcome, this is where I think the work that all the people that you've just described and so many more is so vital at this point in our time. And it's for this reason. We are what are called self-referencing beings. And what that means is we are conditioned. Now, what I'm going to say is we can change it, but we are conditioned to hinge our well-being, typically, upon what's happening in the world around us. So when the world feels stable, we think everything's all nice and buttoned up, you know, and everything is working today the way it worked yesterday, the way it worked 5 years ago and 10 years ago, we go, oh, okay, you know, I feel pretty good. But when the world begins to change, because we are conditioned to tie our well-being into the events external to our spirit, external to our knowing, because we have that conditioning, so many changes are happening right now. That's where the tension, that is where the sense of unrest, that's where the illness, the disease is coming from at record rates, because of the stress induced in a global population, in our global population, because we're witnessing the change, but nobody's ever told us what to do to help us to integrate that change. So this is where I think our work is so, it's vital. It's more than just interesting. It's more than important. I think it's vital. For this reason, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear change in the world around us. And the better we know ourselves, the less we fear one another. And that's important. I want to talk about that in just a moment. But I think perhaps most key, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear ourselves, the less we fear our own power. So what's happening right now is we're witnessing the globalization of a planet in a way that we've never seen. Over almost 8 billion people are being mushed together in a way where what used to be borders and boundaries don't mean the same thing. The oceans that used to separate us don't mean the same thing. The mountain ranges. We're essentially a global civilization when it comes to finance, when it comes to economics, when it comes to energy, when it comes to communications, when it comes to commerce, when it comes to security. And so what's happening is we're pushing together cultures and religions in the way that men have been taught to think about women and the way women have been taught to think about men. We're pushing us all together on the one hand. On the other hand, we're being asked to embrace that change through a thinking that developed, 500 years ago, that is based upon separation. And if we don't know who we are, that can be a very frightening change. However, as we begin to embrace the deepest truths of our existence, our origin, our heritage, and our potential, the biological potentials that we have within us, all of a sudden, Amber, we start to feel way different about ourselves. And we give ourselves the ability to witness without judging, to witness the change in the world without judging it and without fearing that change. And that's a very, very different way to go about what's happening in the world today. So the change is necessary. For this reason, nature, this is the way nature evolves. Nature does not like total balance. I know people that always tell me they're looking for balance in their lives. And I say, really? You know what balance looks like? It looks like this, where nothing is happening, because nature will always strive toward a balance, and less about a balance and more about a harmony. And that's the important distinction. So it's not so much about a balance of energy. It's about a harmonization of the energy. And the moment that nature finds that harmony, that is the trigger to bring on change. And this is the way that nature evolves. So we are going through an evolutionary process. And although it looks scary, if we look closely, Amber, the only things that are breaking down are the things that are unsustainable. So they're big things: unsustainable economy, unsustainable forms of energy, unsustainable ways of growing our food, and unsustainable ways of living, our daily lives. But there are a lot of good things that are happening, and a lot of very sustainable things that are there that are emerging. So for me, I've never been more optimistic about my nation, the US, about all the nations. I leave for Bucharest in the morning, and I'll be in the UK after that. I'm in South America after that. I've never been more optimistic, because now we know what doesn't work, and we can stop spinning our wheels and trying to prop up the systems that are no longer sustainable. And the really good news is we don't have to go back to square one. We've got the solutions to all the big problems in the world. The key is we've got to find a way to make room in our own psyche, in our own emotional well-being. We've got to make room for those new solutions rather than clinging to an idea of what the world used to look like that no longer exists. If we're clinging to that idea, there's no room for the new energy to permeate our being. And when we can bless and let go those old ideas that served us at one point in time, and we've outgrown them. The world has outgrown this way of thinking. And that's a very, very different way of looking at what we're doing. Rather than saying we screwed up, made a bunch of mistakes, judging ourselves, that's an old mindset. Yeah. I think the things probably we could have done better. And if we start from this moment and we move forward, man, we've never had more opportunity to create the kind of world and the kind of life, to become the kind of people, and create the kind of sustainability that we all know is possible. We've never had a better opportunity than right now. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also a realist. And I'm just going to round it out by saying this: I'm a realist, and it takes a lot of work to make the kinds of changes, to let go of old ideas, to embrace new ideas, to think differently about ourselves. It takes a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And when I think back, one of my spiritual mentors, although he never knew it, was the poet and the prophet Khalil Gibran, in his book, the 20th century book entitled The Prophet, where he reminds us that work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. And if we can think of all the work it takes to do the things we're talking about right now, shift the idea of work into our love made visible, everything looks different. And then the question becomes, are we worth the work it takes to make these changes? What we're really asking is, do we love ourselves enough? Do we love ourselves as individuals? Do we love our world enough to put the energy into making the changes? And that's a whole different way of looking at things. And that's the realist in me that knows it's work, but the optimist that says we're worthwhile. So that's a long answer to actually ask me 3 questions, and I answered all 3 of them.
Great. I love that. You know, there were so many things that I was thinking, oh yeah, I want to get back to that. Oh yeah, but I just, let's leave that right where it is. And, you know, the most really salient point for me in what you said was that we are trying to live with a mindset that's hundreds of years old. And I see that all the time through the Lemurian sisterhood, where I'm having these meetings for women, and the men are saying, well, what about us? How come we're not included in that? And because we've had such a great separation in our beings about how to be women and how to be men, that's, and we all do it. We all do it. That when we look at how can we find not particularly balance between the masculine and feminine, but harmony, as you said, between the masculine and feminine, then we have, when we find that inside of us, women that are trying to be like men in the workplace, it's not going to work. When women went into the workplace, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, they dressed like men. And what they got was the same job for less pay. And can you imagine a woman, waltzing into the workplace in a dress? No, they had to be like men as much as possible. And that's not balance. And that doesn't create a new way of thinking or a new way of being. But it has to start, I agree with you, inside. And we need direction for that. How do we get into that old program and reprogram our beliefs about our value and our gifts that we bring to the world? People ask me that a lot, so it would be great if you could address it.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, you answered it in the question, and I think what's so important, and you nailed it when you said women were trying to be men in the workplace. I was in the corporations in the mid 1970s, 80s, early 90s, and I saw this happening. And part of it for me, Amber, part was the kinds of jobs that I was working in. So, for example, as an earth scientist, as a geologist, the women that were drawn to that, it made sense for them to wear suits or to wear pants to work because of what they were going to be doing. But what you said was so important, is that they were trying to be men, and what we really need is women to be women in the workplace, to the women to bring the feminine perspective, intuitive perspective, bring intuition back into the way that the business is done. It's not all about spreadsheets. It's not all about facts and numbers. And even I had the opportunity in the 1990s of touring with some of the most brilliant men and women in the 20th century. I toured with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former astronaut, the sixth man to walk on the moon. And I had the opportunity to tour with Michio Kaku. Are you familiar with the work of Michio Kaku? He is a brilliant physicist, following in the footsteps of Einstein. He's got his own television program. He's very popular in the mainstream media. When the news stations want to understand what a new scientific discovery means, they bring Michio Kaku on to talk about it. And he said something that really impacted me when he was talking. He was talking to a live audience once, and he said, even the most left-brained scientists use intuition if they're honest with themselves. He said what they will do is they will have an intuitive hunch of the way something works, or of some relationship, a chemical relationship, or something. They'll have an intuitive hit, and that intuition is what will inform them and then drive the science forward to either prove or disprove it. So intuition plays an unspoken role in a powerful way. And I think part of what the feminine brings to the table in those positions, in corporate positions, and in business, is rather than doing it behind the scenes, formalize it, make intuition a part of the way that we work and the way that we do business and the way that we treat one another. And the science gives us very, very good reasons to do that, because intuition isn't this wishy-washy, mealy-feely thing. Intuition is all about a field of energy that we interpret through neurons in the heart that we're only beginning to understand. So as we begin to embrace the new discoveries of things like heart intelligence, for example, and then formalize this. When I say formalize, I don't mean highly structured, but I mean openly embrace it and encourage it and develop it, we become better people because we're always in tune with our world, whether we acknowledge it or not. So we just become more aware, more mindful of that attunement. But it helps us when it comes to communication with other people, in the workplace, with our own families, with our loved ones, in our most intimate partnerships, and with our own bodies. This is the key when it comes to ourselves. And I just go back again, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear change in the world. So as we begin to embrace the new discoveries that many of the people that you mentioned are sharing in our live programs, the science of extended neural networks, the science of our ability to interact through these neural networks with the cells in our bodies, the epigenetics that tells us we can change the DNA that we came into this world with. We're not stuck with a static blueprint. So just because our parents had a bunch of health issues in their lives doesn't mean necessarily that we have to. I just had my annual physical. And, every year, I mean, you would think they would keep this stuff on a file when they don't. So they ask the same questions every year, like they've never seen me before, even though I've seen these people for years. And they have a question: have either of your birth parents had any of the following? And they've got 3 columns of little boxes. And I just have to go through and check them all. My father, you and most of our viewers know I come from a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. And my father, through lifestyle, alcohol, cigarettes, all that stuff, he accumulated one of those check boxes, for everything. But I always have to say, and I write on the sheet, I said, due to lifestyle. Because my father had all the cancers and the diabetes and the asthma. I mean, he could go on and on and on. But it doesn't mean that it applies to me because I live my life very, very differently. And some doctors will acknowledge that and some don't. Right. But this is the thing. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to embrace in a healthy way whatever life brings to our doorstep. So the world is changing. It's marching forward, and we're on the move, and that's not going to stop. And there are politicians who are actually selling their politics, their corporations that are selling their corporate propaganda, and there are healthcare and medical and pharmaceutical interests that are all selling us ways to stop the change. They're all telling us, if you do these things, if you elect us, if you buy these things or put these things in your body, you're going to stop the change. And we can't stop the change. What we can do is we can shift the way that we interpret that change and the way we respond to the change, and do so in really, really healthy ways. And I think that's a subtle, but it's a powerful difference. We're conditioned to try to control the world out there, and to be victims. And this community that you're talking about, I think what differentiates us from so many of the other teachings is in very different ways, because everyone learns differently. Everyone learns differently. So not all of our community are scientists. Not all of them follow channeling. I mean, they're very honest about that. Not all of them follow the science, or the science seems too technical, or not all of them like, my personality, for example, or something like that. But everyone learns differently. So when we come together in these groups, there is something there for everyone. And we're all of the speakers are sharing a common theme. And that's, how do we become better people and ultimately create a better world? And we're all sharing different ways to know ourselves in the presence of the change so that we can accomplish that goal together. And in that way, it's a very unifying experience. What you mentioned in Nanaimo, it was a beautiful experience. There were people from over 20 nations that were represented. They came together. We were there for over a week. And while the community was happy for the business, it was a hardship. Hotels ran out of rooms, restaurants ran out of food. Yeah. There were stores that were closed, and they said they had no food on the island. It reminded me of a little Woodstock, and we lived together peacefully for a week. Yeah. But here's what happened. There was a really powerful sense of community that developed. And because it went beyond the physical comforts, it went to something much deeper of finding a family and finding a community of shared values, and then the knowledge to understand how to implement those values in our lives in a meaningful way. So we've gone beyond the time of theory and beyond the time of, where we take notes in a workshop about how to make your life better, and then you go home and maybe a year later, you look at those notes and think about it.
Yeah.
We're at a point now where people need real answers to real challenges that are in their lives today, and they need them quick because the world's on the move. And our community found that at the NIMO, and they'll find it at our other events as well, because that's our passion. That's what we do.
That's what we do. So speaking of other events, implementing the change, I really feel that we've gone a long way from, Lee calls it, listening to a talking head all day in a lecture, to a workshop, a place where, your work and my work is love made visible, because we believe in it and we love our audiences, and we want to give them the gifts of these tools so that they can implement them in their lives to ride these waves of change. And I don't think there's anything more important than really acknowledging it's not going to happen without you doing something. Even if that means you get up 10 minutes early and write down everything you're grateful for, or you do that before you go to bed, or whatever it is. But it's not going to happen just by reading a book or, yes, you could have an epiphany. You could have an epiphany that changes your life, but you and I see thousands of people, and we know how often that happens. Mostly we need to do the work, and we do it. And I'm going to use this again because it's so beautiful. We make our love visible to ourselves by doing the work ourselves, and then that opens up the world to us, and the world is a better place because we are doing our work that comes from self-love. And I think that's a big healing sort of glitch in many generations, is the self-love. And how do we love ourselves enough to want to implement these things every day, that it becomes a practice and we love to do it. My yoga teacher said to me, when you get to the point where you don't say, I have to do my yoga, but I want to do my yoga.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And what you're talking about, again, you just touched on so many topics that could take us in so many different places. I'm just going to go back. I love it when I hear you say that work is love made visible. For my dysfunctional alcoholic family, when my father finally left, to my relief, it was tough for my mom because she ended up raising two boys as a single mother back in the 60s. But I was happy and relieved, because we had relief in the family from the emotional tension and from the physical abuse. And the day that happened, my mom gave me that book. In her infinite wisdom, she gave her 10-year-old son a book. And I'm going to invite our viewers, if you've never checked this book out, it was written early in the 20th century. The man's name was Khalil Gibran, Gibran. He wrote a whole series. He was a poet, but he wrote in prose, illustrated with his own art. And the books are so simple. Each chapter might be a page, page and a half, 2 pages. It'll take you 5 minutes to read it, but you'll think about it for days and days and days. And so what he said about work being love made visible, it became a cornerstone of my life because life was hard. And I lied about my age when I was young, went to work in the copper mill and was loading boxcars with 50-pound bags of cat food, from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. And, some people said, man, what a horrible thing to do. But, if you think about it as love made visible, it changes everything.
It does.
So when you come back, if you can, we all need an emotional anchor, and it's different for everyone. We all need something to tie into, to hang on to plug into, something simple, something that means something to us, something that speaks to us every day of our lives. We need that. Love made visible, work is love made visible, is one of my emotional anchors since the time I was 10. I'm in my mid 60s now, so it's been with me, and I remember it just like yesterday. So I'm going to invite our readers, our viewers, that comes from being an author. I invite our viewers, if you've not checked out Khalil Gibran, go on Amazon and check it out at some point. And I think it may enrich your life and give you some very powerful emotional anchors. When we talk about loving ourselves, though, this is why I think some of the new science is so important, Amber, because we have been steeped in a story for 150 years, since 1859, since the time Charles Darwin released his groundbreaking book titled The Origin of Species. And the time that book was embraced in society, it was embraced in science, it was embraced in education. We have been steeped in the story put forth by Darwin in 1859, and it's a story, it's a false story. I'll begin by saying it's a false story. The new science has overturned all these ideas, but it's a story that tells us that we are insignificant beings living in the universe as an afterthought. It tells us that we are essentially powerless victims of our circumstances. It tells us that we're the result of a fluke of biology, an accident, just a lucky happening of genetic mutations over a long period of time. And it tells us that competition, conflict, and struggle are what allowed us to prevail after that accident. That's the story that we are steeped in. And even if we don't believe it consciously, it is so deeply ingrained into our subconscious. The idea of dog eat dog and the survival of the strongest, those are Darwin's actual words, survival of the strongest. So when it comes to asking us to love ourselves, we may consciously say, oh yeah, I love myself. But subconsciously, we've still got this program that says we are insignificant, that we're not worthy, that life is cheap. And that's the story that makes it so easy for people to hurt and maim and kill in war, in our inner cities, for young people working video games, playing video games, become desensitized to the value of a life and what it means to end a life. All of that, as different as those things are, they all stem from this story that is based upon false assumptions of an obsolete science that is now overturned by peer-reviewed science. So this isn't my theory. It's not my hypothesis. It's not my Greggism. I'm not channeling, some off-planet being for myself. This is rock-solid science that simply is not being shared in the mainstream. And here's why it's important. Because if we're going to get to the root of the hate that is tearing apart our families, it's shredding our communities, it's polarizing nations, and it is creating a health crisis that we've never seen due to the stress of the way that we feel about ourselves and our relationship to the world. If we're going to do more than just put a Band-Aid on, we've got to go to the core of where the thinking comes from. And that is where these new discoveries come in. That's why I'm so excited. That's where the new discoveries come in and the new human story. And that's what I share from many different perspectives, because there's so many discoveries that are being made. So at each of my events, I share that core story, and I also bring in new discoveries. For example, I'm going to be with you and Lee in Boulder. Can I talk about that? Can I say that now?
Talk about that.
Is it okay?
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to be with you in Boulder in about 8 weeks is all it is. Yeah. And I'm going to be able to share new discoveries that were only made in August of 2018. This is how new these things are. Wow. In the neural sciences, they have now found brain cells, new kinds of neurons that we didn't even know existed before, but we've had them all the time. What those neurons mean, how we access them to our benefit, and how we self-regulate using these neurons. And this is the key. We are all learning that we don't live in a fixed biological unit. We live in this magnificent temple that is malleable. And we are born with the ability, and have always had the ability since we appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago, to self-regulate. And as we embrace our inner power to self-regulate, things like our immune system and our longevity enzymes and our intuition and access to our subconscious and our resilience to change and our cognitive abilities and super learning and so much more, as we embrace our ability to self-regulate these things in a way that no other form of life can do, all of a sudden the world out there feels different, and the change in that world feels different because we know ourselves better. And that is the power, I think, and the value of coming together and doing what it is that we do together. So I get to share, along with the New Human Story, new discoveries of the New Human Story. I'll be sharing them with you and Kryon Boulder in January of 2019. Sounds like a long ways away, but this is almost December. So
No,
I think it's like six weeks away.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
That's really exciting. Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you also, since we still have a little bit of time, I want to check on our time here. Your book, Resilience
from the Heart. Resilience from the Heart.
It just sort of stops me. Resilience from the Heart. You know, my copy has all these little sticky notes in it. You know, when you see Gregg, ask him this. When you see Gregg, ask him that. And I love that we have the science behind what actually happens when we are connected to our heart. And it's not like a Valentine, and it's not like a broken heart, and it's not like a mom and a kid love each other, but it's all those things, and it's so much more. So in these times when we're going through so much change, can you just speak about connecting to the heart and having the resilience? What does that mean? And how can we every day look a little differently through the eye of our heart?
Sure. Well, this is where the science comes in. So I'll start with the science, then we'll get to the practical and what the science is telling us. And the science still is unfolding. So this is not a story that is all buttoned up, neat and tidy, as I was mentioning before, but the science is telling us how much we don't know. And the science is telling us how great the capacity that we have really is to embrace change in our lives in a healthy way. We're wired for change. Are biologically wired. We're learning to engage that wiring consciously through the choices that we make and the way we think and what we understand about ourselves. So this is one of the mysteries. I mean, we really don't know where we came from, Amber. I mean, you and I have our opinions. Our viewers have their opinions. As a scientist, I have my opinion. But modern science cannot tell us, draw a line from where we are now, and they can't tell us how we originated. What they can show us is that we appeared 200,000 years ago on this earth, just like we are today, and we haven't changed in 200,000 years. And they can do that because they're able to actually extract DNA from the fossilized remains of ancient versions of ourselves and compare that DNA to us today. It's the same DNA for all intents and purposes. Same brain size, the same nervous system, same neural network, same body proportions. Now, we have evolved consciously for sure. Our consciousness has definitely evolved. But we showed up with all of the extraordinary potential that I'm describing. It was already with us when we showed up. It didn't develop slowly, gradually over a long period of time, as evolution, Darwin's idea of evolution would suggest. Because we've always had this capacity, it makes sense that we are intended to utilize this capacity. And this is what I'm really excited about. How far can we go? What does it really mean to be human on Earth? And although we've done okay with where we are so far, what we now know is we've got this unexplored potential that allows even more of our humanness. And as we become more human and embrace this potential, we have a deeper capacity to love ourselves, a deeper capacity to love one another, a deeper capacity for forgiveness, a deeper capacity to experience life without judging what we experience. And this is where so much of the hurt and the struggle comes from. It's the judgment of what we feel should and should not be. And anytime we have a judgment, that's only possible when we compare what we're experiencing in the moment to some point of reference. And the question, as we become very mindful of these things, is what are we comparing these things to? So I'm going to invite our viewers, if you've never done this before, when you find yourself in judgment of something, and you don't have to look far to find something to judge, you can turn on 6 o'clock news, look at the decision that our government is making for us, or look at a decision your employer is making, or look at the choice that your family member, your partner, or your children have made. And when you feel that spark light up, and you say, you've got just a big charge on this, it's only possible in judgment. Ask yourself, what is your point of reference that you're comparing this experience to? And it doesn't change what's happening, but it empowers you to understand why you're responding to what you're responding to. And if that response is conditioned, is it warranted in this situation? And this is a very, very powerful form of self-awareness and mindfulness. Be aware of what we are comparing the present moment to know if the present moment is serving us, if it's if the judgment is valid or not. It's a really interesting experience to have. So that, I think that's one example. When it comes to resilience itself, there is a science to resilience. So I'll encapsulate it in this way. Resilience begins in the human heart. And literally the way our heart beats moment to moment determines our resilience to change in the world. So here's what I mean by that. When we first come into this world, when we're born, if you're I'm used to doing this with a PowerPoint slide. So I'm seeing the slide, and now I'm going to invite you in the PowerPoint presentation of your mind. No, if you can visualize when you see a heartbeat, so typically you've got this big spike, it goes boop, 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 like that. That boop, boop, like that is called the QRS complex. And the R is the big spike. The R wave is the big spike. Here's why that's important. When we first come into this world, the time that from one R wave to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, that time varies with every heartbeat. It's called heart rate variability. HRV is the acronym. And that's a good thing, because the more HRV we have, the more heart rate variability, the greater our resilience is to change in life. In other words, the easier it is for us to embrace the change. Doesn't mean we're going to stop it, right, what's happening, but it means we are not going to be overwhelmed. We're not going to become so stressed. We're not going to become so resistant, perhaps, to that change, the greater the heart rate variability. Well, typically, now I'm not saying this is true for everyone watching this, but typically, as we age, our heart rate settles into a rhythm that loses the variability. So what that means is the time from one peak to the next becomes more and more and more regular. So when we lose the heart rate variability, change becomes difficult for us. And in the term, and we all know this intuitively, the term is that we become set in our ways. Yeah, exactly. And we hear about this from adults all the time. My grandfather, before he left this world, is a perfect example. He expected the world. He was 96 years old. And in his 96 years, he had developed a mindset for what the world should look like and how people should behave and react. And when the world did not reflect that mindset, or people didn't, that was stressful for him because he had lost that heart rate variability. So that change was stressful. It was very difficult for him. Now, the really good news, the science is telling us this. The science is also telling us you can increase and regain your youthful heart rate variability anytime in your life by engaging in heart-brain coherence. We've talked about that in the other programs. It's a shift in breathing. It is a shift in focus. Focus in the heart, slow the breathing. I'm doing this, I'm touching my heart because this helps us to create a focus. Our awareness will go to the place where we feel the touch. So first step, focus in the heart. Second step, slow the breathing, which sends a signal of safety to the nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. And the third step is to feel from the place where you're creating that touch, to feel a sense of, to the best of your ability, of gratitude for anything or anyone, or care or compassion or appreciation. And each of those words carries a little bit different quality. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. Compassion, for example, is really implicated scientifically in advanced brain states. And again, this is what I'm going to bring to our program, Amber. New brain states have been discovered that scientists didn't even know existed 3 years ago. All right, this is how new this stuff is. And they're finding out about it through Tibetan monks who are accessing deep states of compassion in a way beyond what we typically think of as compassion. It allows them to create these higher brain states. So I'm going to go back to what we were talking about, though. The resilience comes from us. We can increase the heart rate variability by those 3 simple steps. They were identified and really made very simple through an organization called the Institute of Heart Math, Northern California. They have refined what we find in the indigenous traditions. They've refined what they found in the laboratory and those very accessible steps. And I believe we even went through them. And the last time we did this together, if people want to take a look, we don't have time to do the full meditation, but we did that. It's very simple. Shift your awareness from your mind into your heart. Touch your heart gently to facilitate that. From the place of that touch, slow your breathing just a little bit, as if the breathing were coming from the place of the touch. Step 2. Step 3, to the best of your ability, feel a genuine feeling of a positive emotion. The ones in the lab that work best, gratitude is really key, and appreciation, or if you can feel care for another being or for yourself or for a loved one, or compassion. If you can do that for about 3 minutes, you begin to shift that heart rate variability, and it can be a permanent shift. If you do this, a daily practice, 3 minutes, first thing we get in the morning. I've done this for over 20 years, every night before I go to bed. It's the way I sleep at night, in that heart-brain harmony. So, things like this, people think of them often as things that we do, Amber, and I think this is where the struggle often comes from in developing new practices. Because if it's something you do, then you always have to, in your mind, say, I'm going to do this, and you got to make the time to do it, and something else gets in the way, and then you feel stressed about not doing it. If we can think of this as something that we become. So rather than doing it in a moment in time and getting up and walk away, if you can become that heart-brain harmony in those 3 minutes, and then to the best of your abilities, you go throughout the day, check in with your heart, touch your heart, bring your awareness to when it's safe to do so. Don't close your eyes and do this, while you're driving or
hands off the wheel.
Yeah, operating heavy machinery. We don't want to do that. But when it's safe, use common sense. Come back into your heart multiple times per day, and pretty soon it becomes your body's go-to response for what's happening. And then you no longer have to think of it as something that you do. It's something that you become. And that's where you find your power. That's where you find your mastery, is when you become this harmonization of the heart and the brain. And then you begin to apply all the other things that I've mentioned, the longevity, enzymes, super immune response, super learning, cognitive abilities. Those all stem from our ability to initiate this heart-brain response.
Okay.
We covered a lot of ground, didn't we?
We did, at full gallop. Thank you so much, Greg. As always, is just a delight spending this time with you. And I really look forward to our time together on January 12th, 13th, 2019, right around the corner. And these new discoveries, how exciting. Oh boy. So anyone that would like to know more about registering for the program or the details of the days can go to my website, amberwolfphd.com/upcoming events. And until I see you next year, dear brother, all the best to you in all your travels. And thank you
Amber.
so much for being.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much. I'm always honored. You know, I get a little spreadsheet that has my my media interviews for the week, and when I see Dr. Amber Wolf on there, I always get a big smile because I know I love our time together. I know we're going to have a really good conversation.
Yeah.
I love what you do, and I just want to thank our viewing audience. I want to thank you all for all your love and support. Some of you are new with me. Some of you have known me the whole 36 years I've been doing this work. And you still come back and see me again and again because we want to keep it current. So I want to thank everyone for everything that you're doing just to become, this is a tough time we're going through. So thank you for doing your best to become the best person you can be and to lubricate the shift that we're going through to a better world. And I look forward to seeing you in January.
Thank you, Greg. All the best to you.